All right, we're going to go ahead and get started this evening. Welcome to all of you that will listen here. We're going to do a little bit of a discussion first on the reproduction project. And in order to do that, first I wanted to talk a little bit about the content as it related to the lesson before we actually get into a discussion on what I'll be expecting from you with regards to the project. I guess first let's talk a little bit about what are the objectives of the lesson and the actual project. Um, Both the lesson and the project, which is obviously the assessment in this, really wants you to be able to understand the basics about cellular reproduction, whether it be sexual or asexual. Understand what types of organisms it occurs in and how they differ. Okay. Um, the project is asking you to be able to identify the types of gametes that are involved in the process, and then of course the advantages and the disadvantages of each of those. So hopefully you've gone through the lesson, you've taken some notes, and you've taken notice of the major differences between them. Okay, and I just wanted to make mention of a few points before we actually talk about the project. So I'll be brief tonight, but I want you to think about this in terms of both unicellular and multicellular organisms, because remember, single cells are living. Okay. um, One cell can eat, it can get rid of waste, it can perform all these life functions that we've talked about throughout the first half of the year. Okay. um, and one of the final components, really, as we're moving towards the end of this, is that you really need to understand is that in order to pass on your lineage, pass on your genetics, there doesn't always need to be another organism for that to occur with. So first we're going to take a few minutes and talk a little bit about asexual reproduction, or cellular division, if you will. Okay, so in the lesson you talked about, or you should have read about, um, how cells divide and the splitting of cells into daughter cells. That's the process of mitosis. Okay, the result being that a cell splits and it identically creates a duplicate of that mother cell. Okay, but for this, we're talking really about the cell division that involves the splitting of reproductive cells to form what we call gametes. Gametes are those sex cells, either sperm or egg, okay, or ova, singular. And this type of division is called meiosis. Okay, so in either case, in both types of cell division, the cytoplasm of the cell gets pinched off, you form daughter cells, and then you end up having genetically identical daughter cells. So with asexual reproduction, the process is whereby a new cell or an organism is created that is genetically identical to its parent. Okay, and that comes from being based on the process of mitosis. Okay, so these new individuals that are genetically identical, um, essentially, are organisms that also can reproduce asexually. Okay, and what we see with asexual reproduction, it's really more common in very less complex organisms. So those prokaryotic cells, okay, that we find, um, budding and I'm sorry, budding and other types of asexual reproduction is actually, it's common in those lesser cells because it allows for um, large quantities of organisms to produce. So it's different in complex organisms because of the size and the shape and the function of the individuals that produce them. Okay, so with sexual reproduction, okay, you have gametes, or you have sex cells that are produced in multicellular organisms. Okay, and these special organs that produce the gametes in animals are called gonads. Okay, so these gonads produce eggs in female organisms and sperm in male organisms. Okay, so from there, um, Plants, which are a little bit different, obviously, than animals, produce gametes in different different organs. Okay, lower plants produce gametes in structures that are called gametoganglia. Okay, and in there, they're not exclusive to plants. They're also found in some autotrophic um, organisms like protists and fungi, and in cone-bearing plants, they produce also um, different types of gametes. Okay, so with that, um, it goes over this a lot in your lesson, and I would also encourage you to view the live lesson on this. But I wanted to just take a minute here and talk about the advantages and the disadvantages of both, because that's another key component of this. Okay, there are some advantages and disadvantages with each type. Okay, first of all, we need to make mention about genetic variability. It's really the most important result of sexual reproduction. Okay. The gametes used in sexual reproduction vary from the genetic composition of the parents, so what you get are vast numbers of genetic combinations that can occur, so you have individuals that are unique, okay? You don't have identical organisms to the parent, okay? So it allows for variation amongst the species, which is a good thing when we're talking about evolution and the survival of the fittest, okay? Um, in addition to that, when you have organisms that asexually reproduce, those are really genetic copies. They're replicas. It's like putting a piece of paper on a copy machine and spitting out the same thing. Okay, so what that means is that if an organism has a flaw genetically that it doesn't allow it to adapt to that environment, its offspring aren't going to be able to adapt to that environment. Therefore, you're going to have a whole group of organisms, a whole species that essentially are going to be able to evolve and adapt to a specific environmental flux, if you will. Okay, so sexual reproducers, while it's not nearly as quick in terms of producing offspring, the advantage of it is that it produces a lot more genetic variability versus those that are asexually producing organisms. So let's move on to the project, okay, and take a few minutes and talk about how it relates to what we just discussed here. So the project starts off with that organisms reproduce by asexual and sexual means, and their cells divide by methods of meiosis and mitosis. Okay, and depending on the organism's method of reproduction, it may or may not have gametes that require to be fertilized. Okay, so the goal of this project is for you to do some online research and present information on a sexual reproducing organism and an asexual reproducing organism. Okay. You choose two organisms, okay? One sexual reproducer and one asexual reproducer, and that really is at your discretion, okay? I've had some individuals that have already sent the project in. One has talked about, dogs, canines, as a sexual reproducer. Some have talked about cats, some have talked about rabbits, some have talked about horses, and then for your asexual reproducer example, some have talked about protists, some have talked about bacteria, some have talked about fungi. It's up to you. I just want you to be specific, and I want you to make sure that where you're getting your information are reliable, legitimate sources. Okay, and I'll talk about that in another minute. Okay, so while you're crafting this project, I want you to make sure that you really should put this in a several paragraph format. Okay, give me an introduction to the organisms that you chose, then talk about the organism itself. Okay, for each one, I want you to talk about what it looks like. Be specific, where it's found. What function does it have in terms of environmental function, function to society, so on and so forth, and then give me a little bit of background on that organism, okay? How it was found, all of that good stuff, okay? Second, draw or find a graphic that represents your organism, okay? And you can draw it into your project and attach it, or you can find me a graphic. If you find a graphic online, please make sure that you cite the picture where you found it, okay? I need to know where you found it. Third, detail the organism's method of reproduction. Is it sexual or asexual? Tell me the types of gametes that are being used, okay? The means by which fertilization occurs, and then the advantages and the disadvantages of that type of reproduction. We talked about a couple of advantages and disadvantages earlier. You can include those in addition to there are others, okay? It should be in a paragraph format, okay? And like I said, your graphic can be embedded right into it if it's a Word document, or you can attach it separately. It doesn't really matter to me one way or the other. Um, I need sources. Okay, I would strongly recommend that you do not use Wikipedia. Okay, for this project, please use scientifically related websites. Okay, websites from universities, .edu, .gov. .org websites for this project. Okay, I would like to see at least two different sources used on this project. Um, and I am going to be looking to make sure that it is at the very least 300 words. In reality, to really do a good job on this, I would like to see more than that. But at minimum, it needs to be 300 words to just meet that criteria in and of itself. So if you get stuck or you're having problems, please come into the VO this week. Let me know. Be more than happy to help you out, point you in the direction that you need to go. Come in with at least an idea of the two organisms that you want, and we can certainly talk about it from there. And again, if you get stuck, I will be more than happy to help you out. And we'll be back here next week breaking down another project. Have a great week, and we'll see you next Monday.